She knew him, she feared him, and she had already asked for help. But sometimes the system watches and does nothing. A 25-year-old law student in Delhi whose warnings were ignored until it was too late. And yet nothing changed. Because sometimes who you are matters less than who the other person is. Welcome to the inner room. This is the story of Priyadarshini Mattoo. Priyadarshini Mattoo was 25 years old. But to understand her story, we have to go back to a time before Delhi, before law school, before the life she was trying to build for herself. Her family was from Kashmir. In the early 1990s, Kashmir was going through one of the most violent and uncertain periods in its history. Targeted threats, rising militancy, and a growing sense of fear that had begun to spread across the region. For Kashmiri Pandit families, this fear was not abstract. It was direct, personal, and escalating. Many were threatened, some were attacked, names were called out, warnings were issued, and slowly an entire community began to realize that staying back was no longer safe. Families left their homes, not because they wanted to, but because they were forced to. They left behind houses, belongings, memories, entire lives built over generations, often with no clarity of what came next. Priyadarshini's family was one of them. Like thousands of others, they moved to Jammu. But what awaited them was not stability, but survival. Overcrowded camps, harsh weather, limited resources, a sense of displacement that did not end with movement, but stayed with them. Life as they had known it had already been disrupted once. And yet, like many families, they tried to rebuild. Eventually, Priyadarshini moved to Delhi, while her parents continued to live in Jammu. It was a step forward towards education, towards independence, towards reclaiming a sense of normalcy. She enrolled in law school, surrounded herself with a new environment, and began shaping a future for herself. On the surface, it may have looked like a new beginning, but what followed in Delhi would become another chapter of loss, one that did not come from conflict or displacement, but from something much closer and much harder to escape. There was someone who had started to obsess over her, not the kind that fades away when it is not returned, but the kind that lingers and refuses to stop. His name was Santosh Kumar Singh. He was not a stranger. He was a senior from her own law faculty, someone she would have seen around, someone familiar enough to not raise immediate alarm. But what began as attention slowly turned into something else. He started following her, repeatedly. He made advances that were not welcomed, not encouraged, and very clearly rejected. But rejection did not end it. If anything, it seemed to intensify his behavior. This wasn't a single incident. It wasn't even a handful of encounters that could be dismissed as coincidence. It was a pattern. He would wait for her, follow her movements, continue approaching her despite her refusal. The kind of presence that slowly begins to feel like a shadow, always there, always watching. Priyadarshini did what most people are told to do in such situations. She first reported the stalking and harassment to her family. On their advice, she went ahead and filed a police complaint. Complaints were filed, FIRs were registered, her family got involved. This was no longer something being handled quietly or privately. It had entered the system. Somewhere in between all this, Santosh Kumar Singh also filed a complaint with the faculty alleging that she had enrolled in two courses at the same time. An attempt to create trouble for her and make things difficult for her academically. However, this objection was reviewed, cleared, and dismissed, and Priyadarshini went on to complete her MCom in 1996. At one point, the threat was considered serious enough for her to be given police protection. And this is where the story becomes uncomfortable. Because when someone has police protection, it means the danger is already acknowledged. It means the system has recognized that something could happen. The risk was not invisible. It was not imagined. It was documented. And yet, even with that knowledge, nothing truly changed. Because there was another layer to this story. Santosh Kumar Singh was the son of a senior police officer, an inspector general. And in a system where influence matters, where hierarchy shapes behavior, that detail carries weight. Not always openly, not always in ways that can be proven, but in subtle decisions, in delays, in how seriously a complaint is taken. The stalking continued. The fear did not go away. And then, on the 23rd of January 1996, everything that had been building quietly, steadily, over time, reached its breaking point. It was by all accounts an ordinary day. The house in Vasant Kunj, her uncle's house, where Priyadarshini was staying, followed its usual routine. A security guard was posted there, as was standard practice. His presence was part of the daily rhythm, a quiet assurance that the house was being watched, that someone was there. Inside, the domestic help Virendra Prasad had been present through the early part of the afternoon. At around 2:30 p.m., the security guard stepped away briefly. There was nothing unusual about it. No signs of disturbance. No indication that anything was about to change. Priyadarshini was alone. By around 4:50 p.m., Santosh Kumar Singh arrived at the house carrying a motorcycle helmet in his hand. He was seen entering, not just by one person, but by multiple individuals around the property. When he had come earlier, he had spoken to the domestic help saying he wanted to talk, to resolve things, to reach some kind of compromise regarding the complaints that had been filed against him. It sounded like an attempt to settle matters. It was not. Around 4:55 p.m., the domestic help returned and then stepped out again to take the dog for a walk, leaving the house vulnerable once more. That window was enough. Inside that house, Santosh Kumar Singh forced his way in. There was resistance. There were signs of a struggle. Priyadarshini was overpowered. What followed was not just violence. It was brutal, deliberate, and sustained. He raped her and used his helmet to batter her face repeatedly, 14 times until it was beyond recognition. The blows were repeated, deliberate, and forceful. And in the end, he strangled her with the wire. When the silence inside the house began to feel wrong, when calls went unanswered, and the normal rhythm of the day broke, concern turned into alarm. By the time anyone entered and realized what had happened, it was already too late. The house that was meant to be safe, familiar, and protected had become the site of something that should never have been allowed to happen. It was not just an act of violence. It was prolonged, intentional. It was the culmination of something that had been reported already, been known, and still allowed to continue for far too long. Shortly after the crime, Santosh Kumar Singh was arrested, and the case moved into investigation. What followed should have been a straightforward investigation. The Delhi police initially registered the case, but almost immediately concerns began to surface. The accused was not just any individual. He was the son of a senior police officer, and in a system where influence can shape outcomes, that fact could not be ignored. Within 2 days, on January 25, 1996, the investigation was transferred to the Central Bureau of Investigation, the CBI. It was a rare and telling move, because when a case is taken away from the local police so early, it reflects something deeper, a lack of trust in the system that was supposed to handle it. Even then, what followed would prove that changing the agency did not necessarily change the outcome. When the case moved into investigation, it should have been clear. There were pieces of evidence. There were circumstances that pointed in one direction. There were signs of struggle, of forced entry, of presence. But the investigation did not reflect that clarity. Evidence was not handled the way it should have been. Procedures that are meant to preserve truth begin to weaken it instead. Gaps appeared, questions were left unanswered, and slowly the strength of the case began to erode. This is the part of the story where things began to shift from crime to system. Because a crime, however brutal, exists in a moment. But what follows is shaped by institutions, by people, by choices. And in this case, those choices did not strengthen justice, they weakened it. In 1999, 3 years after the murder, the trial court delivered its verdict. Santosh Kumar Singh was acquitted, not because the crime had not taken place, not because there was no suspicion, but because the case, as it was presented, was not strong enough to secure a conviction. What made this moment deeply unsettling was what the judge himself stated. He said he knew that Santosh Kumar Singh was the man who had committed the crime, and yet he was forced to acquit him because the evidence had failed. In a detailed judgment, the court came down heavily on the investigation. It pointed to deliberate inaction. It suggested that the influence of the accused's father, a senior police officer, had played a role in how the case had been handled. The judge observed that the rule of law did not seem to apply equally, especially when it came to the children of those who were meant to enforce it. The Delhi police was criticized for its conduct. Officers were accused of creating false evidence, of supporting the defense, and of failing to carry out a fair investigation. Even the CBI, which had taken over the case, was held responsible for lapses. One of the most crucial failures was the handling of a key witness, Virendra Prasad, the domestic help. He was present in the house on the day of the crime. He had seen movements. He was part of the timeline that could have solidified the case, and yet he was never properly produced before the court. The official claim was that he could not be traced. But later, a journalist was able to locate him in his village in Bihar, raising serious questions about whether this was negligence or something more deliberate. Critical forensic evidence also failed to hold. The helmet used in the assault had been recovered, but the way the evidence was presented allowed the defense to dismiss its significance. The DNA evidence in the rape case was also rejected, as it had not been collected in accordance with proper legal procedure. And so, despite the brutality of the crime, despite the circumstances, despite the judge's own belief in the guilt of the accused, the court held that the state had failed to prove the charge of rape and murder beyond reasonable doubt, and Santosh Kumar Singh walked free. For Priyadarshini's family, this was not just a legal loss. It was a collapse of trust. Outside the courtroom, the case refused to remain quiet. There was public outrage. People came out on the streets not just in anger, but in solidarity. Candlelight vigils were held. And this was the case that led to the beginning of candlelight vigils in India. Members of the media and people from the film industry also joined these marches, amplifying the demand for justice. Inside the courtroom, one presence remained constant: Priyadarshini's father. Ever since the trial began, he did not miss a single hearing, not one. He travelled, appeared, and stood there every single time. For Priyadarshini's parents, life had already been difficult long before this. They had been forced to leave their home in Kashmir, to start over in uncertainty, to rebuild from displacement. But just as they were finding their footing, tragedy found them again. And this time, it did not let go. What followed was not just grief, but a fight, a relentless, exhausting fight against a system that kept failing them. They moved from Srinagar to Jammu and then to Delhi, standing outside CBI headquarters, walking in and out of courtrooms, often in the scorching heat, year after year. Not because they had a choice, but because they had a daughter who no longer had a voice. They fought for her, for justice, for hope, and for the belief that no other family should have to stand where they stood, asking for what should have never been denied. The acquittal did not end the case. Priyadarshini's family challenged the verdict. The case was taken to the Delhi High Court. Outside the courtroom, public outrage continued to grow. Protests, media attention, and sustained pressure ensured that the case did not fade away. And when the High Court took it up in 2006, something changed. This time, the case was heard on a day to day basis. The pace was different. The scrutiny was sharper. It was as if finally the system had decided to move with intention. The same facts were examined with a different level of scrutiny. The inconsistencies were addressed. The failures of the earlier investigation were acknowledged. Within 42 days, the judgment was delivered. Santosh Kumar Singh was found guilty of rape and murder. He was sentenced to death. For the first time in a decade, Priyadarshini's father felt a sense of relief. It seemed like justice had caught up, though delayed, but not denied. But that relief was short-lived. In 2010, the Supreme Court upheld the conviction, but reduced the sentence from death to life imprisonment. Priyadarshini's mother, Rajeshwari Mattoo, a retired Jammu College principal, finally broke her silence for the first time and said she still felt as shattered as the day her daughter was raped and murdered. And despite years of fighting, she could not understand why the sentence had been reduced. She spoke about Priyadarshini's dreams. She had studied law and wanted to be part of the system, to rise into it. But instead, it was that very system that failed her. She said she had been living with that loss every single day. What made even harder was the silence. No apology, no acknowledgement, not once. She recalled that when Santosh was stalking her daughter, she had even spoken to his mother, but was met with only helplessness, being told that her son was spoiled. And even after everything that followed, that silence never changed. Priyadarshini's father too had said that as a father he wished the man who killed his daughter had been hanged then and there. But as a citizen, he could only place his faith in the law. And somewhere between that faith and the silence, justice never truly felt complete. Her father was alive at this point and expressed deep regret over the reduction of the sentence. Around the same time, a campaign was formed, the Justice for Priyadarshini Mattoo campaign. Years later, members of this campaign met Delhi Home Minister Ashish Sood and strongly urged him to not permit the release of convicted rapist and murderer Santosh Kumar Singh from Tihar jail under any circumstances. In 2016, Priyadarshini's father passed away without ever feeling that the justice he had fought for was complete. Her mother, Rajeshwari Mattoo, carried that loss for years. She lived with it every single day until she too passed away in 2020. And in 2022, her sister as well. During the years of trial and legal proceedings, Santosh Kumar Singh spent time out on bail. He got married. He had a child. There were payrolls. There were periods where he was not behind bars. And through all of this, there was not even once, not a single moment, where he or his family acknowledged what had been done. No acceptance of responsibility, just silence. Today, nearly 30 years later, the case is still not truly over. Santosh Kumar Singh remains convicted and is serving life imprisonment. But he has repeatedly sought premature release. The matter has returned to the courts multiple times. As of 2026, the case remains under judicial review, with courts directing him to surrender during proceedings while reconsideration of his release continues. And now it is Priyadarshini's Mattoo's brother Hemant Mattoo who is following the case, leading the fight, and continuing to oppose any attempt at his release. As a law-abiding citizen, Priyadarshini did everything she was supposed to do. She reported the harassment. She went to the system for protection. She studied the law and completed her degree. She had dreams of becoming part of that very system, of fighting cases, of standing for justice. And yet, the same law she believed in failed her. It failed her when she was alive, and it continues to fail her even after she is gone. And this is what makes this story so difficult to accept. Because it forces a question we do not want to answer. When the warning signs were already there, who decided they weren't enough? And how many times has that same decision been made? Before and after her.